51 is simplifying rational expressions with like denominators. So they're being really nice to you at the beginning. It's a like denominator, meaning you can already add, subtract, and those kinds of things with these. However, we need to review how to identify excluded values. Excluded values are when the denominator is 0. So write that down. Excluded means to set denominator equal to 0. I think there was a question like this on your test. So hopefully you did not already forget about it. So when I set the denominator equal to 0, this is the denominator. I take 5m, I set it equal to 0, and I solve for m. This one's relatively easy, but I divide by 5 on both sides. Had this been something else, would have been a little more difficult. 0 divided by 5. Seems like such a trick question, doesn't it? 0. So m, because it's an excluded value, cannot equal 0. If it equals 0, it would make the fraction undefined. Any questions there? Okay, part B then. We're going to do the same concept. We need to find the excluded value of this equation. So again, we take the denominator, we set it equal to 0, and solve. So I subtract 1 from both sides. I get m cannot be equal to -1, and there's my excluded value. Questions thus far? Did not figure. Alright, let's move on to example 2 then. Flipping the page. Simplify each rational expression. If possible, identify any excluded values. If there's a variable on bottom, there is an excluded value. So there might make this, add this to your excluded note. If there, I should capitalize that I, if there is a variable in the denominator or on bottom, then there is an excluded value. There is a variable on the bottom or in the denominator, there is an excluded value. Okay, so on example 2a, is there an excluded value? Yes. So all I need to do is set the bottom equal to 0, and I can find my excluded value. I'm going to do this over to the side. So I take 12h, set it equal to 0, and I divide by 12 on both sides, I end up with h cannot equal 0. You'll realize very quickly if it's always multiplication, it will pretty much always be 0. Okay? The 0 product property tells you that anything multiplied by 0 is 0. We kind of already know that. So doing this work becomes kind of redundant and silly. So you can just write it down as h cannot equal 0. Okay, next it says we need to simplify this. In order to simplify, I must factor. So I'm going to look for my greatest common factor that I can pull out of the top and the bottom. Okay, so I look at 8h squared, and I'm going to expand it, and I'll look at 12h, and I'll expand that. So remember, I'm looking for the prime factorization of these two numbers. So what is the prime factorization of 8? 2 times 2 times 2. Okay, prime factorization of h squared is just h times h. Prime factorization of 12 is 2 times 2 times 3. And we just rewrite that h because there's nothing to do with it. The things they have in common are the greatest common factor that you can pull out of it. So I have a 2, which makes a 4, and an h. So my greatest common factor is 4h. So I'm going to factor out that 4h. So factoring out 4h means I'm basically dividing this. So 8 divided by 4 is 2, and h squared divided by h is h. Good. Again, I'm factoring out 4h on the bottom of this. I'd end up with 3 because 12 divided by 4 is 3, and h divided by h is, well, 1, but basically it goes away. So what this allows us to do is cancel some stuff. I can cancel that 4h because it's on both top and bottom, and there's a product. It's multiplication. So I'm left with whatever's left after I do my canceling. So it's 2h over 3, and that's it. I'm done. Okay? So find your greatest common factor and put it in there. Again, I want to remind you that for the number part of it, you can find the greatest common factor in your calculator. Just have your calculator on, press math. It's down there at the bottom of number. It will show you okay, I'll give y'all time, get on that calculator, press math, tab over to number. Okay, once you get into that math number, it's near the bottom, number 9 on my calculator at least. You're going to type in GCD, greatest common denominator, okay, which is the same thing as the greatest common factor. So the greatest common denominator of 8 and 12, so 8 comma 12, close that parenthesis, enter. You can only do 2 numbers at a time. But anyways, it gives you the number, it's 4. So if you get larger numbers and you want to know the greatest common factor, do that with them. Okay? Any questions on that piece? Okay, we're going to do a little more difficult one now. We have 2m minus 6 over m minus 3. Again, I need to find the excluded value since there's a variable in the bottom. So set m minus 3 equal to 0, and I do what to my 3? I do what to my 3? Add it. I'm going to add 3 to both sides. I'm left with m equaling 3. Okay, so m cannot equal 3. That is my excluded value. That is part of your answer. On your test, you will get points for that. It's a really easy way to get points, so don't forget about it. Okay, I'm looking here. I'm going to say, what can I factor out? What is in common with both this term and this term? Then I'll ask myself the same question here if I can do anything with that. So let's start with the numerator. It's the top. What do I realize about 2m and 6? Saxon's really nice to you. They make problems easy, so take advantage. What can I factor out of 2 and 6? I can factor out of 2. They're both even, right? I can factor out of 2. So when I factor out of 2 or divide it out, I get 2 divided by 2, which is just 1. 1 times m is m. I get a 2 or 6 divided by a 2, and it gives me a 3. Boom. I can only cancel when there's multiplication. Again, I can only cancel when there's multiplication. So this is 2 multiplied by this entire thing. So I can cancel out this entire thing. I'm left with just 2. Cool? Part C. This one will get a little more complicated because we have to deal with the variables. 4y squared plus 8y over y plus 2. Again, Saxon's pretty nice. So it's going to cancel something big out. What can I factor out of the top?
4.
A 4. Can I factor out any variables? Can factor out 1y, right? So that's my greatest common factor that I can pull out of that. I can do this long process of writing it all out, circling the ones I have in common, and then doing it, or I can just realize when I look at it. It's up to you. Okay, so if I pull a 4y out of this one, I'm left with just a y. Pull a 4y out of this one, I'm left with just a 2, positive 2. On the bottom, I couldn't do nothing with that. There was no common anything I could pull out of it. But you should notice, now that there's multiplication, they cancel out, and I'm left with just one answer, 4y. Okay, we still have to do our excluded value, so I take y plus 2, set it equal to 0, subtract 2 on both sides, y then cannot equal negative 2. Part of my answer. Questions? Awesome. 2 more examples and we are done. Example 3. It gives you a very nice problem. So before you freak out on it, let me explain why it's so nice. b over a to the third minus 2b over a to the third. They gave you a common denominator. The common denominator is a to the third. So remember, common denominator stays common. Common denominator stays common. Seems like no matter how many times I say this, somebody will not do it. So please, 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 please write it down. Put a star next to it, boldface it, highlight it, whatever you got to do. So if the common denominator stays common, I can just write it back down. A to the third will be my denominator at the answer. So knowing that, all I'm really doing is solving this problem. b minus 2b, or in reality, 1 minus 2. Okay. So it'll be a negative b, and there we go. I do need to identify an excluded value. Okay, I set the bottom equal to 0. I know y'all don't realize how to officially solve this, but the question is fairly obvious. What can a not equal? 0, right? If I wanted to solve this, I would have to take the cube root, that's the cube root of each side. That is asking what multiplied by itself 3 times is 0 in this case. And the only thing multiplied by itself 3 times that is 0 is 0. So, a cannot equal 0. Questions? Part B. This one is not so nice. So here we go. P q to the negative 2 minus 7 over p to the negative 1 q squared. I need to fix this. What do I do with these negative exponents? I move them to the top, or I move them to the bottom, right? I move them on opposite sides of my fraction bar. So if I did that to this one, I would go p q over q squared, sorry, minus, and then I would move that p to the top. I would move that p to the top, so it would be p to the first on top. So it's 7p on top now, and q squared on the bottom. Boom, common denominator. Okay, I need to identify my excluded values again. So I look and I say what numbers were on bottom when I got there. Okay, when I started, we had a p and a q on bottom. So if p was on bottom, p cannot equal 0. If q was on bottom, q cannot equal 0. Just because it's multiplication, I know that. Okay, you'll need to set each one of them equal to 0. Common denominator stays common. Negative 6p on top. Questions? Example 4 then. Application in fencing a yard. No, nobody writes fractions to measure out a yard. I realize that. This is just a way for them to make you start thinking about these expressions as numbers rather than crazy expressions. Okay? A rectangular field has a length of that number, kilometers, and a width of that number, kilometers. Find the amount of fencing needed to enclose all 4 sides. If I'm enclosing all 4 sides, what am I really doing? I need to find the what? The perimeter, right? Not the area, but the perimeter. So I have 6a over 3a plus 4, right? I have to add that to my other side, which was 8 over 3a plus 4. I should notice that I'm having a common denominator. If I have a common denominator, there's no need to rewrite it every time, because what did I do here? I ended up just putting them together over one common denominator in the first place. So instead of rewriting them, I could just put them all over the same thing. So I'll explain it. I'll do it the long way and then explain how you can do it the short way. So you don't have to copy this part down. So here we go. I have two sides. I need the other two. The other two are going to match. So it's 6a and it's 8. And these are both over 3a plus 4. Instead of writing 3a plus 4 4 times, I would prefer that you just take 3a plus 4 on bottom, leave it there, and then write all the rest of this junk up here up top. 6a plus 8 plus 6a plus 8. Okay? This is way shorter than this is. Okay? So we can do this. All I need to do is identify the like terms. My like terms are those two and those two, so I can just add them together. So I get 6a and 6a, which make 12a's. 8 and 8. 8 and 8 make 16. Good. All over 3a plus 4. Now this is where some of you might get this problem wrong, and I want you to be very careful when you start doing this. I have something that could potentially end up canceling out, but you have to be able to recognize it. No, that's not, there's no multiplication, right? I can't cancel unless there's multiplication. So I have to make multiplication. I do that by factoring, and I ask myself, what can I pull out of 12 and 16? I can pull out 4. If I didn't know that, I could use my calculator. So I can pull out a 4. If I pull out a 4 out of 12, I get left with 3a. If I pull 4 out of 16, I get left with a 4. And look, I have multiplication. 3a plus 4 on bottom, and boom, it cancels, and I get a whole number answer. My goodness, that is amazing. Okay, I needed that 4 to get my answer correct. So make sure that you always end up factoring. You look and say, are these both even? Yes, no. Do they have something else in common? Yes, no. And it's really not that hard to go on your calculator, turn it on, press math, hit GCD, and type in two numbers to see if there's a common factor. So 12 and 16, just to show you that again. It is 4. Okay. Do not forget, though, we still have to find our excluded values. Oh, label, good. Kilometers, thank you. I subtract 4 from both sides. I get 3a equals negative 4. Divide by 3. So a will equal negative 4/3 in this case. Therefore, a cannot equal negative 4/3, and that would be our excluded value. Questions?